What is the world like when God's will is done? Throughout the Gospels, Jesus teaches us about the ways that God's kingdom will look different from what we think, but also the ways in which we can work to keep God's kingdom alive here on earth. And the parables were one of his primary ways of teaching his disciples about this. For the past 7 weeks, many of us have been studying the parables in depth through our Kerygma Bible study series. I'll admit that before this series, I didn't give the parables a great deal of deep thought. I thought they were nice, simple morality tales, easy to understand, especially if you were brought up in the Christian faith as I was. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. Yep, got it. Small things can grow to be big through God. The Good Samaritan. Yep, got it. Help everyone even if they look differently from you. The prodigal son. Yep, got it. God will always welcome us home no matter what. But through this 7-week study, my eyes have been opened to a whole new way to look at the parables. Jesus taught in parables because they are simple stories that everyone can understand on first listen. But their meanings open up profoundly upon closer study. To quote Richard Henderson, the author of the Kerygma series that we have been using, these are not just marvelous stories someone told 2,000 years ago. They are timeless stories which continue to speak to our faith and to help us understand God's will for us today. Parables have a wonderful literary tradition. They were told before Jesus walked this earth with us, and they have continued to be a form of communication used since Jesus' death. My choir group finished our study last night by taking the things that we have learned over the last 7 weeks and attempting to create our own parables. One of the things that struck me most powerfully listening to their parables was how personal each one was. They took things from their own lives and used them to share their thoughts on faith and life. How personal must Jesus' parables have been to him as he shared with his disciples about the kingdom of heaven. This morning, some members of the choir have agreed to let me share their parables with you. I hope you will find them as inspiring and as moving as I do. Becky Sutherland wrote this parable. A sturdy rocking chair sat on a front porch. Sometimes it sat unoccupied, a mere invitation. One night a child cried, and someone took the child to the rocking chair, and the child's complaint was healed. On an afternoon that was just too quiet, someone went to the chair alone and rocked and did not feel so alone anymore. An early morning, before an especially busy day, someone went to the rocking chair, and there they gathered calm and clarity, and the day began well. Prayer is much like a rocking chair. Dr. Woody Woodall shared this parable with us. Hope and kidneys. Ophelia was a very busy woman. The 60-year-old retired teacher was raising her 3 granddaughters on her own. The triplets, Faith, Love, and Hope, were too little to remember their parents, who had died in a car crash when they were just 1 year old. Ophelia heard some bad news from her doctor that morning. Your kidneys are failing, and you must start dialysis. Without a kidney transplant, most people in your situation only live 2 years on average. Ophelia confided to her case manager, I have no family members who could give me a kidney, and the waiting list is very, very long. What will become of my babies? Ophelia had been in the local news, and her story of raising the triplets had even made the internet. The reporter following her story now added a chapter concerning her need for a kidney. One of Ophelia's former students heard about it. Naomi was also a mother of 3 adopted daughters. After much prayer and discussion with her husband, Naomi offered to be tested. Her kidneys were a near-perfect match for Ophelia. The transplant team were able to make it all work, and within a month, Ophelia had a new kidney. Her health improved, and she survived to raise all 3 of her granddaughters. Faith went on to become a doctor. Love went on to become a nurse. Hope, who was always the smallest and sickliest of the triplets, struggled with depression and drug addiction. She would often be heard to say, "My life has no meaning. Why was I even born?" Hope flunked out of college because of her opioid addiction. Ophelia and her sisters tried many times to help her, but she always relapsed. Hope even missed Ophelia's funeral. Meanwhile, Naomi developed severe kidney problems. Her doctor told her much the same news that Ophelia had heard years before, and no one in Naomi's family was a close enough match. She entered the long waiting list for a kidney. The triplets had kept close ties to Naomi, and even Hope had heard about her plight. Hope learned that if she could stay drug-free for a year, she could be considered a kidney donor. She got tested, and she was a match for Naomi. Hope entered rehab again. When asked what would make a difference for her sobriety this time, she always replied, "I am on a mission from God. My life has a purpose." Hope made it a year with clean drug tests, and she was accepted as a donor for Naomi. Hope was thrilled she made it long enough to be a donor. In the hospital, her pain was controlled with opioids, but before her release, she was tapered down and offered medication to help cravings and treat her addiction. She refused, saying she felt the best she had in her whole life. She said she wanted to remain free. 1 week after leaving the hospital, Hope was found dead in her apartment of apparent drug overdose. Her sisters quoted the following scripture at the funeral: "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friend." April Swanson shared this story of the farmers and the meadowlark. 2 farmers were neighbors. One was poor and the other was very rich. As they worked in their fields, a meadowlark sang. They both thought it was the most beautiful song. Day after day they worked in their field. Day after day, the meadowlark sang. After many years, both farmers grew old. The rich farmer thought, "I have enough to last me many years. I will let the trees grow in my field, and many more meadowlarks will come and sing. I will sit in my forest and listen to them." The poor farmer worked in his field. After a while, the trees filled the rich farmer's field, and he went out to sit and listen to the meadowlarks. It was quiet. The poor farmer worked in his field. Day after day, the meadowlark sang. Terrell Wilson shared this story from her experience. 14 years ago, on a spring day, I noticed 2 little Carolina wrens going back and forth to my tea olive. As I looked closer, I saw pieces of pine straw, twigs, and whatever else they could find in their mouths as they went back and forth constructing their nest. Several days later, I noticed things were quiet, and Mother Wren was sitting on her eggs. Papa Wren flew back and forth with food, or taking his turn guarding the eggs. Time passed, and finally I heard chirping and tweeting as each parent was flying in and out, feeding the hungry babies. I was fortunate to have been on my patio the day the babies were ready to fly out on their own. As I watched quietly, the parents cheered the first baby as it came to the edge of the nest, flapping its wings. The parents were on the ground, hopping back and forth, chirping their encouragement. With one big flap of its little wings, it flew off. The second little bird appeared, and the parents went through the same procedure with much excitement. Off it flew. It was the third baby's turn. It hopped up on the edge of the nest and sat. The sound from the parents changed from sounds of excitement to sounds of distress. Little bird gave one last flap of its wings. Instead of soaring into the sky, he fell to the ground below. The parents hopped to its side and began nudging it and chirping encouragement. This continued into the afternoon. The baby, with its parents constantly beside it, never stopping their chirps and tweets. Finally, it made it to the middle of the backyard. It was late afternoon, and I was worried that it might not make it. As I turned to go inside, the tweets and chirps began changing from distress to excitement. I watched as the baby began flapping its wings, and with one big flap, off it went, along with the proud parents. This was such an inspiration to me, as I lost my husband 2 months before this had happened. The message from this for me was that no matter how difficult my life becomes, God is always beside me, cheering me on, just as the parents of the little bird cheered him on. They never gave up on their baby, and God never gives up on us. Chuck Cape shared this story with us about 2 brothers. 2 young brothers went to college. One went to bed at an early hour. The other stayed up late and partied. One rose up early and exercised. The other slept in late and rose up ill. One read his books and studied diligently. The other missed classes and never studied. One passed with honors. The other failed and was dismissed from school. When they went home, their father received them both with open arms. The one who received honors asked the father, "Why have you not condemned my brother?" And the father replied, "You are both my sons, and I love you the same." Jan Henchman shared this parable with us. Corporate fellowship is like a campfire. The more kindling and wood that is added to the pile, along with the fuel, will develop into a large, glowing fire. But if you pull one ember from the fire and allow it to sit alone, it eventually dies out. We must keep the embers together to fuel each other with their warmth. Otherwise, if we don't continue to feed the fire, there is nothing left. During quarantine, you realize how important corporate fellowship is for individuals. I hope these parables from our fellow church members have given you encouragement in your faith as we continue through this time apart. In September, we will be studying the parables in worship during a 4-week sermon series. I hope you will open yourself up to hearing them in a way that you may not have before. What is the world like when God's will is done? May our eyes and ears always be attuned to how we can be a part of God's work.
What is the world like when God's will is done? Mustard seeds grow more than we can conceive. Roots thread the soil, branches reach for the sun. This is a God moves us each to believe. God's will.